you. All right, sports fans. Today we're going to be talking about one of the sexier sides of business insurance. And when I say sexier, I mean the ins and outs of property, business income or interruption, and cyber insurance. And what we want you to know, or excuse me, sorry, these are the ins and outs we want you to know as a business owner or advisor to a business owner. So officially, welcome to the Financial Poise series, Insurance for the Business Owner 101. This is episode number 2, Business Interruption, Property, and Cyber Liability. You can read more about the series on slides 6 through 9, if you would like. And you can read more about Financial Poise as an organization on slide 37. Now, the panelists with me today are Jonathan Mayotte of Thornton Powell Insurance and Catherine Smith Diedrich, an attorney with KSD Law and also an author of legal fiction books. My name is Gary Kirschenbaum. I'm with the Alera Group, and I will be your moderator. For those of you who are really paying attention, Brenda Wells' name was on the slide on some of the slides. She could not join us today, so we did not just exclude her. So now, neither Financial Poise nor, excuse me, nor we intend this to be an infomercial, so I'm not going to read about our bios. If you really want to know more about us, you can see slides 32 through 35 and about the slides. So I will call your attention to the slides as they're relevant to the conversation that we're having. And so if you want to take notes, you can. But don't worry if you're just listening and not necessarily watching or following along on the screen. You'll be just fine. The slides are not critical to the conversation. I want to give a thank you to our co-producer, the National Law Review. You can read more about them on slide 3 or 36. And then the last thing before we begin, slide 4, very important. This is our disclaimer. You are not our clients, and we are not your lawyers. Actually, Jonathan and I don't even practice law. We're just insurance guys. But we are here today, or what we're here today for is your general education and not for you to act on on anything we're saying without appropriate advice. All right. So without any further ado, we will get going here. And first thing that I like to state is that every business owner has at least one contract. We all know this to be true. And despite that they are paying for it and being bound by it and more, they often don't fully understand what all these contracts mean. Our expert panelist here is going to look to dispel some of the mystery and shed a little light on some of the basics of our subject matter today. Again, property, business income, and cyber liability. So this will be a conversation in plain English. We'll be using some fictional scenarios to illustrate the material. And I will start by just laying a quick foundation for the first part of what we'll be discussing today. So Jonathan, if you would be so kind as to just tell us what is business property insurance and the difference between business property and business personal property and betterments and improvements.
Sure, my pleasure. So, business property insurance, it's a type of commercial insurance that covers physical assets owned by a business against loss or damage from various risks like fire, theft, vandalism, storms, natural disasters. Now, I say storms and natural disasters with a little bit of a caveat there because there are typically exclusions for things like floods, earthquakes, unless you especially add those. So that's one of the many reasons to make sure you read your policy, make sure you know what's covered. So it's typically going to cover your building, your equipment, machinery, furniture, fixtures, inventory supplies, things like that, outdoor signs. It's important because, you need to recover after a physical loss. You want to minimize your downtime and your financial strain. So that's property insurance now, or what we're looking at now, business personal property, we're going to be talking about contents, furniture, computers, equipment, office supplies, inventory. Your building coverage is insuring the building. So your structures, if you have a warehouse, if you own the building that you occupy, you're going to want to insure that most likely. You may also be in a situation where you have a triple net lease and you're required to insure that building as part of your lease agreement. So another reason to make sure you read those contracts. So,
So,
um,
and I
oh,
think you might have lumped them together, but if I understand you correctly, just to delineate this, business property is going to be your real property, your building, location, storefront, what have you, versus your business personal property. That's all the stuff inside your building.
yes, I
Okay.
thank you. I I inadvertently kind of lumped everything together.
Yeah.
Got my mind going a little bit too fast, but yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Business personal property is your contents, and building coverage is for your building and any structures. Um, and
Okay.
then improvements and betterments. If you rent a building and say you make improvements that are permanent, things that you aren't going to be taking with you, say you put in new lighting or something that's going to be permanently installed into the building, that's going to be covered under tenants improvements and betterments. A lot of times people will rent space and they'll do a build out, and you want to cover the cost of that build out and everything that was put into that build out, you'd cover it under tenants improvements and betterments coverage.
Got it. Got it. Terrific. Thank you. Catherine, the other topic that we're talking about here in the first part of this, business interruption or business income goes by both, like a lot of things in insurance, lots of names for the same thing. Um, can you explain what business interruption insurance is and why it can be so important?
Yes, I can. So business interruption insurance is, in my opinion, just as critical as the business property portion that Jonathan just went over with you. And that's because if damage occurs to your business property and your business can no longer function or functions at a lesser productivity level than normal, that's where business interruption insurance comes into play. Let's say a fire occurs and half your widget manufacturing plant is shut down. While commercial property may pay for actual physical damage to that property, the building, the manufacturing machinery, the inventory, and the cost to repair or rebuild that damaged building, business interruption covers loss of net income due to the closure of the business while the repairs are underway. So, of course, everything depends on the language of the policy. I'm sure you'll hear us say that throughout this hour, but it is true and it is critical. So, these policies may cover rent or lease payments, relocation costs, employee wages, taxes, loan payments. There's all sorts of different parts of this that if you think about your business and consider what may occur if you couldn't manufacture the widget, that's the income that this is meant to cover. Now, importantly, there's three real elements that are required to trigger coverage here. And because I'm a lawyer, I can't help myself but kind of point this out to you. One is direct physical damage or loss to your business property. That has to occur. It's not because something just stopped running. There has to be some physical loss or damage to the property so that it creates an unavoidable business interruption because of that property damage. And then you also need a loss of business income. And I think interestingly, where that comes into play are the situations that have arose out of COVID and that are still being maneuvering their way through the courts. So many businesses sought BI, business interruption reimbursement for COVID, damage from COVID. And they argued that because it was an actual an actual physical disease and had physical properties to COVID, that there was loss or damage to their buildings, machinery, they couldn't use them, whatever. And some states, based on the policy language, found that the physical loss or damage portion was satisfied and they could look into the business income. And other states found that it wasn't satisfied based on the language and the court ruling. So it's very important to look at that policy language. And then finally, some things to look for in your BI, business interruption policy, and talk to these gentlemen about when you're in the process of getting that policy. Gary and Jonathan are, typically there's a 24 to 72-hour waiting period associated with the BI. And just like you'll have a deductible in the property part of the policy, this means that if something happens, the business income won't begin to register for 24 hours. So whatever happened in that 24 hours, you won't get reimbursement for, or it could be 72. So it's important to talk to Jonathan and Gary about your business when you're buying these policies and what you think is appropriate. And then there's an indemnity period. That means how long the insurer will pay you during the cost of repair. Some policies say it's a certain indemnity period for a certain time. Others say a reasonable amount of time till your business is up and running. Others will give you longer until you've got your market share back potentially, or your customers are back on board. So all those things should be talked about, and you should really consider when you're thinking about the type of policy your particular business might need.
Right. Terrific. Uh, Thorough. Thank you. Jonathan, anything to add?
I think Catherine did a fantastic job of covering all the nuts and bolts on that.
Okay. I would point out one thing. You said it. I'm just gonna reiterate it because we know that a good portion of our audience is going to be small and medium-sized businesses, which many of those policies will have something called ALS, actual loss sustained, but you'll see those words in your policy. It typically, again, a small business, and which is really what you were talking about, Catherine, where it's whatever the loss was, it's covered, which is a great thing to have.
Yeah.
So, all right, moving on. So insurance policies are based on the value of what's being insured. Fairly straightforward. But how should we be valuing these assets, Jonathan?
Well, there's a few different ways to value the assets. You can do it on a full replacement cost basis. That's going to be the amount, say it's your building. It's going to be the amount that's going to cost to reconstruct the building from the ground up. It's going to factor in demolition of the previous structure. You could also do a functional replacement cost, which if you wanted to replace the building and maybe it's an older building, but you only need half the space or something like that, you can do it for maybe a lesser value than the full replacement cost. And then you could have one story instead of two stories, maybe half the space. You can also do actual cash value, which would be, factor in depreciation into the amount of the settlement. There's pros and cons to all of it. Replacement cost, if you want to build it back, is, you're going to pay a little bit more premium on that. But I'd say the big thing to keep in mind is a lot of people don't take into account if they have a partial loss. If you have a partial loss on your building and you get hit with that depreciation, then whatever that loss is, you're not going to get the full amount of what that loss is. So that's something that I try to remind people. Yes, you might be saving a little bit of money on the premium, but if you have a claim, it may end up costing you a few more dollars out of pocket. So it's just something to kind of take into account.
Gotcha. And so, well, I was going to jump to co-insurance, but so I'm a business owner and I've got a plant, and I know that the building, if I wanted to sell it today, I could sell it for let's say $2 million. But the insurance company's telling me I have to insure it for 4.8 million. What's going on? Why would I want to insure it for twice as much as what it's worth?
Great question. So, uh, market value versus how much it's actually going to cost to replace the building are two totally separate topics. When you're talking about replacing the building, you're looking at the cost of materials, the cost of labor. There's We'll get into this probably a little bit later, but you may have to take into account things like ordinance and law. Maybe building codes have changed, so you're going to have to make some upgrades that you wouldn't have otherwise had to make on the previous structure. So that's the reason the replacement cost ends up being higher than the market value.
Yeah, okay. And these days, I think more common than not to see that with the way costs have gone up. Um,
Absolutely.
and you mentioned, partial losses, which in my experience and knowledge I have, more often than not, property losses are partial losses, not complete losses. And so talk a little bit about co-insurance and how that works and why it's important for a business owner to understand, one, if they have co-insurance in their program and what the implication of it is.
Absolutely. That's a big one. Co-insurance is a clause that's going to require the policyholder to insure the property for a certain percentage of the total value, typically 80%, 90%, or 100%. So if you insure for less than that percentage and then you suffer a loss, you may end up facing a penalty, meaning that you're not going to fully get reimbursed. So basically, the way it works is you need to carry coverage equal to at least the specified percentage of the property's replacement value, or what the insurance carrier is saying that you need to insure it to. Otherwise, the insurance company is going to reduce the payout proportionately. So, I can give you an
So if I,
example. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was just going to illustrate an example, but go for
Oh, I was
it.
going to do one too. So
Go.
I was going to say, if your property values $1 million, your co-insurance is 80%, then you need to insure to at least $800,000. If you insure for 600,000 and then say you have $100,000 loss, your payout's going to be 600,000 divided by 800,000 multiplied by 100,000. You're only going to get $75,000 back. So that's the important reason to make sure that you're insuring to value when you have
Got
co-insurance.
it. Good. So for everybody out there, look at your policies, make sure if you have co-insurance, you're aware of it and that you're at the right values.
So Jonathan, can I do a quick follow-up
Of
question for
course, please.
Jonathan? So,
Yes.
so Jonathan, if the co-insurance is at 80% and you insure at 80% or higher, will you get full replacement value?
As long as it's 80% or higher, yes. So if you have a $1 million limit and you do 80%, you can insure it anywhere between 800,000 and $1 million. A lot of times what I'll do with policies that I write is I'll put 80% on there and then insure it to full value, just to make sure that there is just a little bit of wiggle room in case something happens when the adjuster comes out and something moves in one direction or another. Just gives a little bit more padding.
Good. Great. Thank you. All right. So good foundation, pun intended. So let's jump into a hypothetical here. So we've got uh, Claire, Diane, Ellie, and Francine. They've come together and they're formed a company, and they are the directors and officers now of Z Corp, which is a manufacturer. And they're reviewing their business plan and they're focusing on their insurance. So, Jonathan, what are the different types of property insurance that they would want to consider for a manufacturing company?
So depending on whether or not they own their building, or I had referenced before triple net lease, and the landlord's requiring them to insure the building, they may need building coverage. Something else that I did not mention before is a lot of times if you have permanently installed equipment in a building, some carriers will actually insure it under building coverage, and it actually gives you a lower rate. So it's on a carrier by carrier basis, but that's sometimes you'll end up with building coverage that way. If you're strictly renting, you're not responsible for the actual buildings themselves in any way, shape, or form. You're going to want to insure your contents, so you want to make sure that you have business personal property coverage. If you've done any sort of build out, or you have anything that you've permanently installed, lighting, HVAC system, stuff that now belongs to the landlord but you've paid for, you want to make sure you have tenants improvements and betterments coverage. You're going to want to insure your business income to cover any expenses during downtime if you have a covered property loss. Also, being a manufacturer, you may want to consider contingent business income in case one of your suppliers has a loss and they're unable to deliver essential products to your company. I believe that's something that we're also going to be hitting on in a little while, so I don't want to get too deep into it.
Good point. Go ahead, Catherine.
No, I was going to address contingent business interruption in the next, when I talk about the next section, because we passed over it and I think it's important.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead, just jump into it. We brought it up. Let's talk about it.
Okay. Well, contingent business interruption is insurance that is for if your company is a supplier and you get product or widgets from another company that you depend on to make your product, and something happens to that other company's, it provides coverage to you for the business interruption that is a result of the financial losses caused by property damage occurring at the premises of a supplier or customer. So, for example, lost income and extra expenses incurred due to a flood. There were a bunch of these out of Hurricane Katrina, when a lot of my clients could not get products because of all the damage. Trucks couldn't get in and out, and they needed those products from the South, and they weren't coming. And in those situations, that's where you want to notify your carrier of a potential contingent business interruption claim. Losses caused to you because of damage to a third party that supplies you, or that you supply as well. So it works both ways, and it's very important coverage.
So it is. And so just to be perfectly clear, this is a coverage that you need. It's not standard coverage. You need to ask for this coverage.
Right. Your fabulous broker should be bringing that up to you, which I know Jonathan and Gary would do. But it's very important to have that kind of consideration, because there's some other things you can think about in this arena too, in the business interruption. Some things that you're going to want to need, and we'll talk about in this a minute, but forensic accountants, public adjusters, things like that. If a claim happens, there are some policies that will will pay you up to a certain amount to be able to hire these specialized folks if you have a claim.
So actually, well, I'll come back to that. But so just to clarify also what you're saying. So your example, there were businesses that were wiped out because of Katrina, and those businesses were suppliers to companies, let's say up in the north. And if if those companies in the north have contingent coverage here, they would be able to make a claim for the damages due to not being able to get their supplies.
Right.
However, during the pandemic, there were a lot of companies not able to get inventory or supplies because they couldn't get on a ship to get over here, our supply chain. Would that qualify?
Well, doubtful.
Okay.
But that is the kind of argument that's being made currently and, going through the courts. There were arguments made that the contingent business interruption should have been triggered because they couldn't get the product they needed. So it all depends on the specific facts. And I doubt that would hit the most policy language, but there were and are always all sorts of arguments made regarding these issues.
Got it. Spoken like a very good attorney. Thank you. Um, all right, so we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but well, Catherine, continue on. Just Jonathan laid out what Z Corp would need, or at least consider, depending on the circumstances, as a manufacturer. But what if they weren't a manufacturer? What if they were a different type of business, like a retailer, or
Right.
uh, what would be some other options there? A finance, like a law firm or an accounting firm. Like, would their insurance needs from a property perspective change at all?
So that's a great question. And I think it's important to zoom out a little bit and to say that a risk analysis should happen in every situation because different businesses have different risk concerns. And the key elements for every business to consider are things like risk identification. What are the risks that you in your business are concerned most about? Assess those risks, meaning what are your tolerance to be able to withstand those risks? What do you think would cause you the most financial harm? And how do you want to treat those risks? In other words, do you want to transfer that risk to an insurance company, or do you want to hold it and prepare to handle that in a different way? And that's really important because as you're talking, when you're considering purchasing your insurance, you really want to have a good handle on what is important to your business. What do you see in the next 3 to 5 years? Are you going to build out? Are you going to hold? All sorts of things to consider. So let's take the example that Gary gave of a retailer. So the first question I would ask is it e-commerce only or both
Okay.
e-commerce and brick and mortar, right? So if I'm e-commerce only, the next question I want to ask is, that's great, but do I hold my product somewhere? Have I purchased my product and am I warehousing it in either my warehouse or an off-site, someone else's warehouse? And Jonathan went into some of the issues when you're leasing, how that goes into place. So you really do have to drill down onto those things. If I'm e-commerce alone and I'm brokering the product and I'm never touching it, it's never my responsibility, well, then I'm likely going to hit cyber insurance, which we'll talk about
Right.
later, and some other insurance, maybe to handle the tariffs. There's insurance that can potentially cover that. So all those kind of things you have to think about. If you own a building and you're storing your product, do you have brick and mortar as a retailer? Now we're back to considering what we talked about in the first part of this segment. Property insurance for your building, property insurance for your inventory, all those kind of things are really critical. Um,
So, oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
No,
Well,
go ahead.
so something came to mind when you were talking about that, and it's something that I've seen for a long time, but it feels like it's becoming more common. They're not necessarily retailers. This could be a distributor, even a manufacturer. I can think of one client in particular that, in an effort to manage their supply chain, is storing their product in third-party warehouses. And a lot of times, sometimes it's cut and dry, but in other instances, the question comes up, well, but they're providing insurance, they being the third-party warehouse owner. What should a business owner, whatever the business might be, but they're going to store their inventory in a third-party warehouse. How should they handle covering that inventory properly?
Yeah. Obviously, you've got to ask for the policy. You've got to look at the lease. You have to see what their contractual obligations are, right? And maybe they are going to fully provide for it, but you've got to look at the insurance and what they're handling. However, if it's my product, I would want to make sure that it's fully insured for the full value. The policies have all sorts of ways to, are you getting, here's the critical thing. One of the critical things with product that you're holding and you purchase, if something happens to it, is the insurance going to pay you for the value of that product as you would sell it, the value you would get? Or are they going to value it at the cost to you? Or are they going to depreciate it? There's all sorts of things in endorsements you can add on and different things to make sure that you are getting, if something happens, the amount you thought you would get as best you can. So it's really important to look at the lease, look at what insurance, and see how they are going to value the product and the limits. To you, your product might be much more valuable than the warehouse has provided in insurance. So there's a number of factors, and it's so important to be ahead of the curve in that regard instead of being surprised on the back end.
Sure. Good. Thank you. Jonathan, anything to add to all that?
Yeah, one thing that I would, I guess, with that example with the warehouse is, uh, if it's me, I would prefer to insure it myself. I'd prefer to have my own policy because then that way you have control over that policy. You own that policy. It's yours. Now the third party warehouse may have good coverage, but you don't have control over that policy if it's theirs. So I would prefer personally, if it were my company, that I would be the named insured on there. I'm going to be the one who has full control over what limits are on there, deductibles, endorsements, any changes that need to be made. I can do that versus having to rely upon a third party to just hopefully they're doing the right thing.
Right. Well, one of my concerns is in that scenario in the past has been, so the insured has our client, let's say, has, $1 million worth of goods in the warehouse that they're storing, and the third party uh, warehousing entity offers to cover that, and they have $5 million of coverage. You're covered, except they have $10 million worth of goods in the warehouse, and if the whole warehouse goes, how much are you getting paid? And
Mhm.
that's a hard thing to know and understand. And it can, even if you have the ability of verifying it initially, you don't know if that circumstance is going to change if they bring more goods into the warehouse and insure the same way or not. So, anyway, probably talk about that one for a long time. Um, so clearly, Z Corp needs to be protected, from different risks, losses that could be very unique to their situation. And we've talked about a bunch of them already, including contingent uh, business income. But Jonathan, is there anything else that's unique or special, circumstance-wise or endorsement-wise, that they should be considering?
Yeah, depending on the type of building that they have, or I guess whether they own the building, they lease the building, that's obviously going to play into this, but we'll assume that they own the building. They're going to want to make sure that they have, I kind of briefly touched on this, but make sure you have good ordinance and law coverage. Especially if it's an
Yeah.
older building, uh,
Sure.
on those partial losses, you can really get, you could end up getting a big shock when you have to go through and do code improvements, and you're having to pay for upgrades that were never really factored into your replacement costs. So you need to make sure that that's included. Equipment breakdown coverage, to get that endorsed if there's physical or financial loss from mechanical breakdowns, like you have a boiler or HVAC, computers that are not usually covered under the standard policy unless you have it endorsed. You want to make sure that possibly that you have utility services endorsement on there in case there's utility failure that's outside the property. Say there's a massive power surge, or a transformer blows up and causes issues with your building. Also, here's another one that I think a lot of people will uh, we're seeing it more now, but inflation guard endorsement, making sure that your building limit increases year over year to keep up with inflation. If you do this, you typically will do 8%. I think we're seeing 12% a lot now. What they'll do is each year at renewal, they'll take your building limit and they'll increase it by that percentage with the idea of keeping up with inflation. Now, when, 10 years ago or whatever, I remember I'd go through and I'd look at a lot of these building limits and we'd have that endorsement on there. Then after 5 years, I'd go through and run the replacement cost again and we'd be overinsured. That's not happening anymore.
Right,
So
right.
this endorsement's actually really important. So I would strongly suggest that you take a look at that when you're insuring your buildings.
Of course, what you're telling me is that my premium's going to increase by at least that much on a percentage basis every year also, right?
It is, but it's also that pales in comparison to the cost of having to pay any of that claim out of pocket.
100%. 100%. Well said. So, so Catherine, let's pretend that Z Corp has a fire, and we're only going to pretend because we wouldn't actually want that to happen, right? Um, but they have a fire as a result. There's a slowdown, maybe even a complete shutdown of their operations. What should they be doing? What do they need to know to do to maximize a business income claim?
Okay, to maximize a business income claim, there's a number of things you should be doing all along before something happens, of course, right? You should, number one, though, respond quickly and notify your insurers and begin gathering the necessary information for a business interruption loss. Consider hiring a forensic accountant and or a coverage counsel to help understand what your policy says about the formula you need to apply in order to get the correct business income. You need to review your policy language with the forensic accountant and or counsel to see what and how you will need to prove your loss. Now, the really critical part that you should have is while your business is going on, you should keep very good records of revenue per month, expenses per month, costs per month, all the things that have gone on, including capital improvements. Um, Often you'll have seasonal businesses where maybe they sell cool items. So the spring to fall months are their high season, right? And you will want to be able to show that during that period of time, your revenue and income is typically 20% higher than it is the rest of the year. So you're going to want to estimate the revenue the business would have generated if the disruption had not occurred and against, of course, what did happen, what revenue you generated during the period of the fire, after the fire, through the period of time that you were up and running again. So you're going to have historical data, projections, industry benchmarks, growth trends, all those things that go into a good, solid estimate of the revenue that helps the insured in getting the best business income recovery that it can. There's a lot of other factors that go into that, but I think those are the critical ones.
Okay. And so that sounds like a lot of work for a business owner. I think one of the most important things that you said was you hire a forensic accountant to help you put this together. I know that, for instance, when we have claims for clients with business income losses, we have people that we bring on to do that work because it can be rather complicated and the claims themselves can
It's
be rather
very
complicated.
complicated.
But one of the things I know that I want to add is because I will try to make sure that we get this on every client's policy, which is a little claims handling coverage or claims
Yep.
preparation coverage, because those forensic accountants can cost a little bit. And it would be nice if you actually have coverage built into your program to pay for the preparation of that claim.
Right. And you can get that added on. You've got to watch the language in those. Sometimes the carrier will be very narrow in what it'll allow you to use that money for, but you want to be able to have forensic accountants. Sometimes you want to be able to have a public adjuster to be able to help you with the claim. There's all sorts of things. Usually they'll exclude legal fees, but there's all sorts of different language you can get added on to help that situation when it arises. And it is important.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, let's switch gears to cyber. And some people might be thinking, well, why would we include cyber in a property conversation? And the reason that we built it in this way is in a lot of ways, a cyber loss can emulate a fire loss in a property. It's often referred to as a digital fire loss. So Oh, sorry. Oh, I was on the slide. So why would, well, here, Jonathan, uh, actually, I just answered that property. Never mind. Sorry. I had my question all set up and I took it over.
Stealing my thunder.
Yeah, sorry about that. So,
That's okay.
um, well, here, this is a super simple one, but is it prudent for all businesses, regardless of size, to be having or carrying cyber insurance today?
Who
Uh,
is that for?
Uh, Jonathan, why don't you grab that one?
Absolutely, it's prudent. There's out there, if you have any sort of digital files, whether it's client information, even employee information, if you have names, birthdays, social security numbers, it could be in an email, it could be stored on a server, it could be stored on the cloud. I don't think anybody has floppy disks or CD-ROMs anymore, but maybe you have those stacked up in your office. That would be considered digital data. So if any of that information is stolen, compromised, you could have something. I'm just looking at a thumb drive right here. If you have a thumb drive with information on it and that gets lost or stolen, you could have just put your client's personal information, your employees' personal information at risk. So whether you're a small business, a large business, there's definitely a reason you should have it, or definitely I would say you should have it, and then the question just becomes how much should you have?
Right.
Yeah. I
So,
do. Let me add quick to that
please,
if I can.
please.
I have had clients who are in the um, financial services industry where they are indemnified by other companies for things that might happen. Now that depends on the company and the indemnification, right? But they are there are some reasons to really look at your situation, like we said, and see why, what it would cover if something happens. So really be careful about going through what you need it for. So you're not just buying it and then it's missing the mark, like two ships passing in the night, which I've seen happen and is very frustrating for the client.
For sure. For sure. One of the things that I see is, or one of the things I hear is, we're small, we don't have much risk, we're not a lot of exposure, and the business owner just doesn't want to spend another couple $1,000s
Right.
on yet one more line of insurance. And it's ironic to me because a lot of those businesses, if you look at them online, they try to make themselves look really big, right? Because they want to appear resourceful and have everything that's needed for the customers that are coming to their website. But the bad guys that's how they hunt. They look for you online. They see your website and they go, "Oh, that might be a good target," right? Because you appear big, you must have money in the bank. Let's go after it. So I just find it ironic sometimes that the reason that they don't think they need it, yet it's their marketing that's putting them out there and making them a target. Um, so, Catherine, I'll give this one to you, please. Most people recognize the fundamental risks, right, that cyber policies cover. Things that we're talking about here, ransomware breaches, um, uh, cyber crime, et cetera. So what's one of the other value propositions with a cyber policy that's not listed in the insuring agreement or in the definitions?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest advantages are the response teams that come along with most good cyber policies. So, if something happens, if you can imagine suddenly you can't get access to your information, or you've been shut down, or your client information, let's say, may have been stolen, all sorts of those things that suddenly you look and you cannot access or you can't recover, that's an immediate issue. Kind of like Gary mentioned at the beginning of property fire, right? That's a real emergency and you have to be able to call 911. That's what you want. At that time, you don't want to be searching for, well, who is the lawyer who understands the state and federal requirements when this happens? Who do we notify? How much time do we have? You also don't want to be at the last minute looking for specialists in cybersecurity experts who can track what happened, tell you what to turn down, shut off, all those important things. You don't have the time to get that ready. So many of these insurers will offer 24/7, 365 response teams that if something happens, you call that 1-800 number and you've got people involved, lawyers, cybersecurity experts, and potentially crisis communication professionals that will help you, tell you what to do, get involved right away, tell you the letters that have to go out, if any, within so many hours of the loss. So you are not running afoul of penalties and other things that just make it worse.
Got it. Jonathan, anything to?
Yeah, I would say definitely on the front end too, the risk management controls that they will help you with. A lot of the cyber carriers that we work with, they'll run scans of your web domains and your email addresses, and they'll give you a report that. Well, I'll admit I'm not an IT person, so some of it I'll look at and say, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I know enough to be able to say, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, you should hand this over to your IT person and they'll know exactly what it means. They'll be able to get the patches in place and make the fixes. And if for some reason there's any questions, they can always call that 1-800 number and they'll walk them through exactly what it is that they're looking for to make sure that they're compliant, try to help them avoid getting a claim or having a claim situation arise. So a lot of the stuff that's really kind of baked into these policies, the added value stuff is just amazing.
Yeah, I know for me personally, if I was in the chair and had a breach or a ransomware scenario, well, ransomware scenario specifically, actually, and it was up to me to go buy crypto to pay off the bad guys, I wouldn't even know where to go.
Right.
And that's one of the services they provide. So,
Yeah.
well, let's continue with you here, Jonathan. Pros and cons of a cyber liability insurance policy. And when I say cons, there's no downside to having a policy. What I'm actually referring to are the pitfalls that a business owner should be aware of, like, whether it's sublimits on certain coverages or exclusions. What are things they need to be looking for?
Sure. So, I mean, pros obviously, you're going to cover your financial impact of the breach with, data breach response costs, legal defense, regulatory fines, forensic investigations. You'll get crisis management if needed, business interruption coverage. That topic's come up again. Another reason why you want to make sure that you have a cyber policy, or kind of how like a cyber policy and a property policy can interact with each other. That business income claim that comes from the cyber claim isn't going to be covered under the property policy. So you really need to make sure that you have that covered. There's going to be third party protection. Now, the cons, the pitfalls that you need to make sure of that Gary mentioned. Look at those sublimits. Make sure that you've got sufficient coverage there because sometimes those limits can be very, very low. You might have a ransomware extortion cap at like 25,000 or something like that. Is that really going to be enough?
No.
So those exactly, yeah, it's not going to be enough. So you need to make sure that you aren't taking those low sublimits. Make sure that you're looking at the exclusions that are on there, whether it's insider threats. Maybe they exclude coverage if the breach was caused by an employee. That could be a big problem. A lot of times claims are caused from somebody on the inside, or it could just be an inadvertent error by an employee. But either way, make sure it's covered. Failure to maintain security controls is something that could be excluded. Prior known incidents. I want to make sure that there's a little thing called the retroactive date that could deny coverage on prior claims. So if that comes in, make sure that that lines up. So there's a lot of pitfalls. There are a lot of things, but talk to your agent, talk to your broker, make sure that that we're paying attention to those things. I mean, we know what to pay attention to, but it's good that everybody's aware of that too.
Okay. Catherine, anything to add, particularly on the pitfall side, things that you've seen?
No, I think it was covered.
Okay. I'll add one thing, and I saw this recently, and because I am an insurance person, I have all the horror stories, right? That's part of my job. Um, but in a fraudulent transfer situation, basically somebody tricks you into sending money to the wrong place. Um, typically we see multiple triggers for that. And I just saw one recently where the only trigger was email, which is certainly the most common. But we have a client that, and this was actually a number of years ago before AI. AI only is making to make this situation worse, where somebody impersonated the CEO of the company on the phone. And there was a wire for, yeah, I forget the amount, tens of thousands of dollars sent somewhere that it shouldn't have been sent to. And under this policy, we were just doing some analysis work on the other day. That would not have been covered. So, got to really read the fine print and know what you're looking for. So, last question on cyber, and Catherine, you tackled the claim preparation in the case of a fire for a contingent income claim, business income claim. So, Z Corp's hit with a ransomware attack. What do they do?
They call their team. They call
That's
the
right.
team right away. They call the team will instruct them what to do. And by team, I mean if they do have a policy, they're going to call the team that's located on there. They can call the FBI depending on the attack and what's going on as well. Other security enforcement agencies. And depending on what happened, most situations you're told, you should have that cybersecurity expert on the phone right away because they're going to tell you whether to shut down, don't touch it, don't move. There's all sorts of situations I've seen, the cast of horrors as to what goes on in these situations. Some might trigger additional damage if you try to shut down, right? Or if you try to forward.
Right.
So the best thing to do is just call the cybersecurity expert, whether that's on your own payroll or and then call the authorities, whoever that might be for this situation. I think that's critical. And then there's going to be a series of things, as we discussed, that happen very quickly after that, meaning who you have to notify, depending on if it's consumers, letters you have to send out, what's required by the law, the penalties you may incur if you don't do it correctly, if you don't do it within a certain amount of time, what the PR, that's another big thing. How do you communicate to the public? And it's good to have that type of PR expertise, unless you've got one on your payroll, which if you're a medium, small size company, you typically
Probably.
don't,
Yeah.
to have that kind of person involved. I do recommend to clients, even with this kind of coverage, that they might want to consider having someone um, who they've a PR or a cybersecurity expert who they've themselves found that they like. You're not paying them any money, but you've got them on call, right? You've interviewed them, you like them, and they understand that if something happens, you're going to call them. So you need to be prepared for this. It's critical because obviously, as we've all heard and we've seen, and the three of us have actually seen it, the steps you take can make a big difference with protecting what's going on to your customers and your intellectual property and your finances.
Yep. Every business should have a disaster recovery plan, and they should have one for physical
100%.
physical losses as well as cyber, just so they know what to do.
A
And
100%.
thank you for that. And I wanted you to answer that simple question the way that you did because I can't hammer away enough at how important or the value proposition of a cyber policy is because of that response team when things go bad. So we are running up on our time. And so I think we covered everything we wanted to cover today. Catherine, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate your time. Listeners, appreciate your time. If you want to find more financial poise webinars, you can go to www.financialpoise.com And we'll look to see you at future continuing education events another time. Thank you all.
Thank
Bye now.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.